in different countries, depending on their stage of development, their social institutions, their cultures, and other national differences. Now, the International Labor Organization, the ILO, has come up with information on 7 types of precarious work. And I will not spend much time on this, but I simply want to alert you to the fact that there are many different kinds of precariousness. Some have to do with income. Income insecurity means that you don't have enough money to live. You cannot be assured that you will have enough money to live tomorrow. Representation security talks about whether or not people have individual rights in laws, whether or not people are allowed to join unions, whether unions are allowed to collectively bargain. The other 5 kinds have to do with work of various kinds. Labor market insecurity refers to whether or not there are opportunities for jobs in the labor market. Employment security refers to whether or not workers are protected from losing their jobs. Can you be fired arbitrarily because your boss doesn't like you? Job security is the ability to continue in your occupational activity. Do you belong to an occupation that has craft boundaries, for example, in which skills are protected or not? Work security here refers to safety. Safety refers to are you forced to work in unsafe conditions where you might die or catch a bad disease? And finally, skill reproduction security refers to access to basic education and vocational training. These are all types of precariousness. Different countries have different levels of precariousness on these various dimensions. And one of the interesting things the ILO has done is rank order countries on each of these 7. But very briefly, let me summarize. Okay, got it. Okay. Summarize just overall. Give you an overall picture. The only reason I'm doing this is to give you a sense of the fact that different countries have different precarious problems. And if you can't see this very clearly, it's not because your eyes are bad. It's because I got this out of a publication, and so the PDF wasn't so clear. So don't worry. Okay, the best countries in terms of economic security are what we call the pace setters. The pace setters are Canada, Western Europe, Japan. They are doing the best. They have the best policies, the best economic security in the world. The pragmatists, the United States, Australia, South Africa, Chile, they have pretty good outcomes. They're pretty secure in terms of relatively speaking, but their policies and practices are not so good. So they're doing good despite themselves. The conventionals are Brazil, Argentina, Russia, Eastern Europe. These are countries that have relatively good policies, but the outcomes for security overall are not as good as you might think. And finally, the dark blue countries, Mexico, a part of South America, much of Africa, and much of Asia, including India and China, are countries that have much to do. They're very insecure. And so my point here is that precarity means different things in different countries. In Europe, precariousness might mean that the level of welfare benefits has been decreased in Sweden or Norway. In Africa, precariousness might mean that people have to live on less than $1 a day. Very different levels of precarity in different countries. Okay, now I will now turn, so in developed industrial countries, the key dimensions of precarious work are associated with differences in jobs in the formal economy, such as earnings inequality, security inequality, and vulnerability to being fired, and temporary work. The term precarity, indeed, has been associated with a European social movement. Its origins are in France, précarité, feeling devalued by businesses, powerless due to the assault on unions, and struggling with a shrinking welfare system. European workers became increasingly vulnerable to the labor market and began to organize around the concept of precarity, as they were faced with living and working without stability or a safety net. European activists have generally identified precarity as part of neoliberal globalization involving greater capital mobility, privatization, and attacks on welfare. In other countries, including many countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, precarious work is often the norm and is linked more to employment in the informal rather than the formal economy, and whether jobs pay above poverty wages. Indeed, most workers in the world find themselves in the informal economy. Informality is especially relevant to Latin America, of course, as all Latin American countries have been faced with a rising informal sector. In fact, when Ulrich Beck talked about the Brazilianization of the West, he was referring to the growth of the informal sector and spreading that throughout the world. If you want to collect data, information on precarious work, these are the kinds of information that I think you should go collect. For the formal sector, you would want to collect information on things like how closely are people attached to their employers? How long time do they spend with their employers? Has this been going up or down? You could also look at the growth of non-standard work arrangements. Now, non-standard work arrangements are a feature of precarious work, especially, it's all over the world, but it's especially in countries like the United States, Europe, and to some extent Brazil. You have a triangle, which is an organization in which people work. You've got organizations like this hire certain people on a fixed term for only 10 months, let's say, or on-call basis when you are called in to work that morning, to work for the day. If you're a construction worker, let's say, or a teacher for the day, a substitute teacher. Organizations also hire temporary workers from temporary help agencies. This is precarious because the worker, you can't see the worker very well in there, but the worker's in there. The worker in there is working at the Big Triangle company, but the employer of that worker is the temp help agency. You also have contracting out. Sometimes this contracting work out is outsourced to other kinds of companies. Sometimes the contract company comes on your site and works for you where you work. Now, we have found information that suggests that this kind of other non-standard employment relations have increased in the United States, in Europe. It's especially high in countries that have a lot of labor protections, like Spain and France. Because in those countries, like Brazil, it's very difficult to fire people. So, employers are very reluctant to hire you. And so, a good solution for them is the temporary help agency. So that's the kind of things that have been happening in the formal sector. Also, you have, in the formal sector, an increase in unemployment. This was true in Europe during the 90s. In the U.S., unemployment was relatively low in the 90s. Instead of having unemployment, you had bad jobs, low-wage jobs. But unemployment has increased in the United States. It's increased in Brazil. You'll see an increase in unemployment throughout the world in the next 2 or 3 years because of this economic crisis. Now, the other thing to look at is the informal sector. The informal sector is much harder to collect information on than the formal sector because the informal sector operates, by definition, outside of state regulation. And so you're not on some government roll. Latin America informal work is very important in Latin America. It's very important in Brazil. It's very important in Brazil, in part, because of the strong labor laws in Brazil, which makes it very difficult for employers to fire people, and so they are reluctant to hire them. The best evidence for Brazil, however, suggests that informal employment is declining somewhat in the last 10 years. The red part of the pie indicates workers in the formal sector who have Social Security. They have employment protections, and so informal employment increased during the 90s and has decreased in the last under Lula in the last administration. So Brazil is sort of changing and becoming more formal. So the question is whether or not the jobs in this formal economy are precarious. When you look at Brazil relative to other countries in Latin America, you see that Brazil is sort of in the middle. It's as a proportion of workers, you see that Brazil is sort of here, sort of in the middle. If you look at informality as a result of GDP, as a proportion of the gross domestic product, you find that Brazil, again, is about in the middle. About 40% of GDP is in the informal sector in Brazil. Low is Chile and Bolivia, is the highest. What I've tried to do now is tell you about what precarious work is, why it's important, why it has become more common now, and what are some of the different types of precarity around the world. I will spend the rest of my time, a short time, talking about the policy implications. What do we do about it? I hope I have convinced you that it's important to do something because it affects lots of people and lots of countries. The growth of precarious work creates new challenges and opportunities for social scientists seeking to explain this phenomenon and to help frame effective policies to address it. There is currently a theoretical vacuum in our understanding of the mechanisms generating precarity and especially its solutions. That's bad. The good news is that this vacuum provides an intellectual space and opportunity for social scientists to explain the nature of precarious work and to offer possible solutions. Economists currently dominate discussions on public policy. This is certainly true in the United States. I suspect it's true in Brazil as well. Labor economists, for example, have taken the lead in producing the detailed studies about what is happening in the world of work, providing policymakers with the key descriptions and facts that need to be addressed. It's the economists that are defining the reality for the policymakers. But free markets are not the solution, they are the problem. Since the issues of precarious work and job insecurity are rooted in social and political forces, and the economy is, as Karl Polanyi and many others reminded us, rooted in social and political forces, they're embedded in social relations, sociologists and political scientists and other social scientists today have a tremendous opportunity to help shape public policy by explaining how broad institutional and cultural factors generate insecurity and inequality. Such explanations are a crucial first step toward framing effective policies to tackle the causes and consequences of precarity and to rebuild the social contract. All industrial countries are faced with the basic problem of balancing security, produced by the problem of precarity, and flexibility, produced by competition, the two dimensions of Polanyi's double movement. Countries have sought to solve this problem in different ways, and the solutions they have adopted are specific to local countries, contexts. In some countries, socialism was adopted to deal with the uncertainties associated with rapid social change. By the late 1980s, this system was largely discredited in countries like Russia and China, and capitalism became the dominant economic form. The question now is what kinds of institutional arrangements are put in place to reduce employers' risks and employees' insecurity. The degree to which employers are able to shift risks to employees depends on workers' relative power and control. different production regimes have produced different solutions. Now, the relationship between economic and precarity will vary by country depending on its economic and social policies in addition to its labor market conditions. So I don't think it's employment precarity that varies so much from one country to the next as it is insecurity. So this 2x2 table distinguishes between employment security, that is, the chances are that you will be protected from being fired from your job, and labor market insecurity, which is the chances that you will find new jobs once you are fired. And the four cases that I've got up there illustrate four different types. In France, you have a high degree of employment protection, hard to get fired, and a lot of spending on labor market policies, on training, and so on. Japan is also high in labor market, in employment protection, but they spend relatively little on providing you with employment opportunities in the labor market. I would suspect Brazil is somewhere between these two, probably a little bit closer to France, maybe, but that's something for you to tell me. On the other hand, you've got countries in which it's very easy to be fired, very low employment protections. Denmark, for example. The United States. The difference is that in the United States, it's very easy to be fired, and once you're fired, you're on your own pretty much, because the government invests very little in training and providing you with a new job. In Denmark, things are a bit different. In Denmark, it's very easy to be fired, but if you're fired, you have lots of opportunity to learn new jobs, to acquire new skills. And this famous system is called flexi-security. It combines flexibility for the employer and security for the worker. And to me, this is a very hopeful sign because it provides the potential to have security for workers in a precarious world. Now, if we are to think about policies to address precarious work and its consequences, I believe it must address two main things. The first is the recognition that the forces that have led to the growth of precarious work are not likely to go away anytime soon. So there is little chance that work will become less precarious in the future. Therefore, social policies should first and foremost help people deal with the consequences of precarity and help them deal with the confusion and the chaos that precarity produces in their lives. Second, policies should, whenever possible, try to create more secure jobs. Let me briefly discuss each of these two policies. The first policy is the government providing social protections. Of course, the most pressing issue here is health insurance. Health insurance provided to all citizens that is not tied to a particular employer. Maybe it's because I'm coming from the United States, and we have the weirdest system in the world, in which only people who, 50 million people out of a population of 300 million, 1 out of every 6 does not have health insurance. This is crazy. And this has made precarity so much worse. Because when people lose their jobs, their first concern is, what if I get sick? What if my family gets sick? Now, Brazil, I understand, in its constitution, has guaranteed health insurance to everybody. That's great. There may be a question about the quality of that health care, but the fact that there is this health care should reduce precarity. The other kind of social protection we need is pension, old age pensions. In the United States, we need to have a better system. Right now, for many of us, including me, my pension is tied up in the stock market. So when I read in the paper the stock market goes down, I say, I better stay healthy because I'm not going to be able to retire anytime soon. That is the problem for lots of people. So we need a more protected system. So protections are the first step. The second step is we need to create more secure jobs. We need to increase employment in the formal sector, decrease the size of the informal sector. Public policies can help encourage businesses to create more secure jobs to a certain extent. They could provide tax credits and other incentives to make employers create better jobs. But the reality is, relying on the private sector to create good jobs is very limited, because the private sector responds to the market. And so here I think there is a real role for Keynesian kind of interventions and public work programs like was characterized in the U.S. in the 1930s and like Lula is doing in Brazil in creating more public sector jobs. There are a lot of things that the government can spend money on besides bombs and stuff like that. They could fix our bridges. They could take care of people that are sick and take care of old people. These are important issues for the public sector. Now, the ability of workers to exercise collective agency and worker power through unions and other organizations like political parties is absolutely essential in order to create seriously efforts to address precarious work and to create the kind of counter-movement that implements the types of social investments and social protections that address problems related to precarious work or creating better jobs. It's not going to happen by itself. The reason why precarious work was able to grow was because labor was so weak. And so labor needs to reorganize, revitalize in order to achieve these kinds of goals. This will happen in specific countries at the local level. At the same time, the global nature of problems related to precarity highlights the need for these local concerns to be linked to more global concerns through, for example, transnational unions, international labor standards, and other global efforts. So in conclusion, there are many obstacles to implementing the kinds of social investments and social protections I've discussed today. Nevertheless, a clear understanding of the nature of the problem, combined with the identification of feasible, practical alternatives and the political will to attain them, supported by the collective power of workers, offers the promise of generating an effective counter-movement.